In the early days of 2025, the world witnessed a decision unlike any before it. Not in Washington, not in Paris, but in the heart of West Africa. In Burkina Faso, a single stroke of a pen reshaped history. Captain Ibrahim Traoré, the young leader who has defied convention at every turn, signed a law that abolished private land ownership altogether. No debates, no concessions, no drawn-out process. From that moment on, land in Burkina Faso could never again be sold, not to foreign corporations, not to wealthy elites, not even to the richest individual on earth. Land became state-owned, and only Burkinabé citizens could access it through leases: 18 years for temporary use, 99 for strategic projects. Ownership, however, was declared permanently untouchable. It was more than reform. It was revolution. In a single act, Traoré reversed centuries of dispossession, exploitation, and foreign control, and he did it without firing a shot. Burkina Faso did not march in protest, nor did it launch a coup. It simply announced that land was no longer a commodity. The declaration wasn't televised. It wasn't a warning. It was a permanent legal severance from a system imposed since colonial times. A system that allowed foreign firms to buy vast tracts of farmland, build resorts where villages once prayed, and plant crops for export while local families went hungry. That system ended the day Traoré signed the decree. The implications were staggering. For the first time in Africa's post-colonial history, a nation declared war on the very concept of private land ownership. And the world asked the same question: what would Traoré do with all this land, and who would it empower? The answers came quickly. Land was not being hoarded by the state. It was being redistributed to the people who had always worked it: subsistence farmers, women, and youth who for generations had survived by renting plots from absentee landlords. For them, this was not charity, but recognition. They were no longer laborers. They were custodians. The reform also dismantled a legacy law, the notorious Expropriation Act of 1975, that had allowed governments to seize land in the name of public interest and hand it over to foreign developers. That pipeline closed overnight. Western governments and global markets called the move reckless. Think tanks warned of sanctions. Embassies whispered of instability. Investors froze projects. But Traoré didn't flinch. He described the move as healing a return to ancestral sovereignty, a rejection of dispossession disguised as development. This decision wasn't only about foreign exploitation, it also struck at internal inequality. For decades, elites and political families amassed vast estates, while poor farmers struggled to claim even a fragment. With the new law, access to land was equalized. Not by wealth, not by connections, but by belonging. National identity, not capital, became the key to access. In that sense, Traoré didn't just alter Burkina Faso's legal structure, he flipped the colonial logic that reduced African soil to real estate. Land was no longer a product, it was a right. But a critical question remained: what good is land if people lack tools, water, and training to use it? Traoré's policy extended beyond symbolism. The state introduced farming cooperatives, irrigation systems, and training programs in agroecology and climate-resilient techniques. With each plot came not just soil, but support, enabling families to plant, harvest, and sustain themselves. For too long, Burkina Faso's resources had been siphoned away, up to 10 tons of gold mined daily, with only a fraction officially reported and millions lost to smuggling. Foreign firms paid bribes to slash tax rates from 30% to as low as 3%. Rural citizens saw nothing but dust and debt. Now, the state was positioning itself as guardian, not broker. Redistribution also carried a social dimension. Women, who perform more than 60% of agricultural work yet rarely held legal land rights, were placed at the center. Cooperatives of women farmers began receiving land directly, enabling them to organize production, manage livestock, and even venture into agro-industrial exports. The impact was immediate. Research across Africa has shown that when women control land, food security improves, education rates rise, and incomes diversify. For Burkina Faso, it meant development driven not from abroad, but from within communities themselves. Youth, too, were prioritized. With more than half the country's population under 17, Traoré saw not a demographic crisis, but an opportunity. State-leased land became a launchpad for young people trained in modern farming techniques, precision irrigation, vertical farming, solar drying systems, and agro-data management. Instead of leaving villages for overcrowded cities, young people began returning, equipped with skills to build prosperity where they lived. Rural exodus gave way to rural innovation. The international reaction was swift and sharp. Western media labeled the policy radical, reckless, unconstitutional. Editorials predicted collapse. Aid was suspended. Embassies cooled ties. Yet the concern was less about Burkina Faso itself than the precedent it set. If one of the poorest landlocked countries could nationalize all land and survive, what would stop others? Mali, Ghana, Niger, and beyond were already watching closely. Civil society groups began citing Burkina Faso in their policy proposals. Movements in South Africa, where land reform debates had dragged on for years, suddenly found new urgency. Where Pretoria hesitated, Ouagadougou acted with speed. For Traoré, it wasn't about debate. It was about courage. Still, courage comes at a cost. Sanctions loom, investment threats multiply. But Traoré continues signing decrees instead of pleading for aid. He empowers local farmers rather than appeasing foreign donors. And each move shifts the continent's political imagination. Conversations in Lagos, chants in Kampala, declarations in Windhoek all echo the same refrain. If Burkina Faso can do it, why not us? Foreign investors remain welcome, but under strict terms. Ownership is banned, leases are capped, projects must align with national priorities. No more flower farms exporting to Europe while local children go hungry. No more avocado plantations enriching Paris supermarkets while Burkina Faso imports food. Instead, crops like millet, maize, and sorghum, staples of the national diet, are being prioritized. Agriculture is being transformed into industry. Tomato processing plants, grain mills, and oil factories are being set up by local entrepreneurs, reducing dependency on imports and creating domestic value chains. A new tomato facility in Koudougou, for example, is projected to replace millions of dollars worth of imported paste annually. In every case, the focus is sovereignty over dependency, dignity over profit. The symbolism of this reform runs deeper than economics. For decades, African nations were told to sell, to wait, to obey. Now, one country is saying, no to dispossession, no to dependency. Yes to dignity, yes to power rooted in people. For women who once begged for land, for youth who once fled in despair, for farmers who once toiled without recognition. This is not just policy. It is restoration. It is the planting of futures, not just crops. And as neighboring countries watch, as Western boardrooms panic, one truth becomes undeniable. An idea has been set loose, and ideas cannot be sanctioned. Captain Ibrahim Traoré has done more than pass a law. He has redrawn the map of African resistance. He has shown that sovereignty is not a slogan but a strategy, that land can be more than a product, that dignity can be written into law, and in doing so, he may have sparked a continental awakening. The soil of Burkina Faso is no longer for sale. It belongs, once again, to the people who walk it, plant it, and bleed for it. The question is no longer whether Traoré can be stopped. The question is whether Africa is ready to follow.